On June 18, 1983, Dr. Sally Ride became the first American woman to fly in space. Her accomplishments came to symbolize women's achievements in all male-dominated fields. Overnight, she became one of the most famous women in American history. This is the story of Sally Ride, a woman space pioneer.
She has flown once. She'll tell you all about it, has a fantastic story to tell. And like all of the astronauts I've met, she's very, very anxious to continue her career and fly again, and we wish her best luck in getting up again soon. Dr. Sally Ride.
I have to admit, not prepared for all the attention that I received, both before the flight, I'd say in the month before the flight, leading up to the flight, and the several months after the flight. You know, just the barrage of media, the demands on my time, the demands for interviews, to go here to give a speech, and then there to give a speech, and then here to receive an award, and then there to talk to somebody else. I really wasn't prepared for that.
Please welcome Sally Ride.
I can remember some people being very disappointed that she wouldn't go on their show or go on their deal or whatever. But she wanted to turn around and get to work. She's that type that she wanted to turn around and get to work and not be paraded up and down the street as some sort of special person. I remember having a conversation with her, and I can't even remember where it was, but saying, you know, that you're going to have to expect that you are going to be unique. You're the first American woman in space, and you're just going to be unique the rest of your life, a little bit the same way that Neil Armstrong will always be different.
Even as a young schoolgirl, growing up in a suburb of Los Angeles, California, it was very clear that Sally was not afraid to think of being unconventional.
What she thought she was going to become was either a quarterback for the UCLA Bruins or a shortstop for the Dodgers. And when she got to be about 10 or 11, we gave her a tennis racket, and she was good at all sports. She played with the boys, better than most of them.
In 1963, Sally witnessed how the Russians upstaged America and shocked the world when female cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova orbited the Earth for 3 days. At that time, Tereshkova's flight lasted longer than all of the American astronauts' flight time combined. This was the first time Sally heard of a woman going into space. In addition, Sally already had her sights set on the stars.
I remember when I was in elementary school, I loved astronomy. My parents bought me a small telescope that I couldn't see anything out of, but we'd set it up in the front yard and just try to find the moon and try and find Jupiter.
We knew from the time that they were very small that their judgment was good and that we would support whatever they wanted to do. And we just always did that. I can't take credit for it, that's just the way we are.
In 1965, Sally entered Westlake School, a private all-girls high school with a reputation of being one of the premier prep schools in the country. Sally's tennis abilities gained her a full scholarship at the school. From its origin in 1904, Westlake's motto has been Passunt quia passe ventura, Latin for they can because they think they can. This left a profound impression on Sally's formative years.
In high school, I think I was always interested in science. I was fascinated by the space program, but back then, I don't know, other people may have a different reaction, but I didn't really think it was a viable career to think about being an astronaut. And I honestly didn't give it any thought as something that I could possibly do.
We were not scientists. We were people who liked to read and to have all kinds of reading around for the kids. And she read, I think, everything we had around, but did not get involved in science until she was a junior in high school. And her 11th grade teacher just set her toward the stars.
During her years at Westlake and later as an undergraduate at Swarthmore College, Sally closely followed the American space program's moon race with the Russians. Throughout the 1960s and early 70s, there were still no discussions at all of women becoming astronauts.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The 1972 amendment to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 created a major change to NASA's astronaut recruitment drive. The act states federal employment must be made free from any discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. As a federal agency, NASA was required to comply, opening the doors to women and minorities to join the astronaut corps. When the Space Shuttle was designed in the early 1970s, Americans had just begun to realize the tremendous industrial and commercial potential of space travel and focused on a reusable transportation system that could accommodate both men and women.
We decided we needed an entirely different type of astronaut to complement our pilot astronauts. And that was the first time that we opened the selection up to all walks of life, and of course women were included. The design of the shuttle itself gave the capability to have some privacy on board the shuttle and a larger vehicle to fly in so that the pilots could get their job done, and yet the scientists would have an area to work in to do theirs, so the science could be emphasized.
We wanted people that were used to working under different conditions in laboratories, who were self-driving people that could aid us in the utilization now of space flight in a space station or in going back to the moon as scientists. So we were looking for people of a whole new cross-section of our country as compared to just the limited test pilots that we had in the early days of spaceflight.
Sally was a nationally ranked athlete and graduate student in astrophysics at Stanford University when she first heard that NASA was looking for scientist astronauts and that for the first time applications were open to women.
The moment I heard that NASA was accepting applications from women for the astronaut program, I applied right away. In fact, I read a small announcement in the Stanford Daily, the Stanford University newspaper. NASA had put out ads to a lot of universities because this was new. They had never accepted women, and they wanted to recruit women and minorities to apply. They were afraid they wouldn't get any applications. So, I read an advertisement and responded that day.
It was very rewarding at that time to get as many people applying for the job as we did. We ended up with about 12,000 people who were reasonably qualified for the job, and that was very rewarding that we had that many people interested.
We narrowed it down to a group of several hundred. We invited these people in for interviews, and at that time they got their medical examinations.
The interview itself, the personal interview, which is probably the most significant factor in making final judgments, is, I think, about an hour, hour and a half long. I didn't time mine. It was not a peppering set of questions of great detail as much as a probing of you and how you see yourself. As I recall, it was, well, tell us about yourself. Start with high school.
I think what we had in our minds at the time was about 15 people to select out of the 12,000. But when we saw the quality of people that we got applying, when we saw the tremendous acceptance in the country of what we were trying to do, we realized in the final days that there were just so many good people that we expanded the number beyond the first initial thoughts in our mind.
35 people were ultimately chosen to become astronauts in 1978. 6 of them were women.
None of us really know why we were chosen to be among the 35 that joined the astronaut program in 1978. When you look across the group, though, what you find is a generally genial crowd. We got along pretty well. We all knew how to work together in a team. So I think it was more our ability to work with people and to get along with each other in addition to some of the qualifications that you might expect.
The 6 women astronauts chosen in 1978 were to be trained as mission specialists. They were Dr. Sally Ride, a research physicist, Dr. Judith Resnick, an electrical engineer, Dr. Kathy Sullivan, an oceanographic geologist, Anna Fisher, MD, an emergency room physician, Ray Sutton, MD, a surgeon, and Dr. Shannon Lucid, a biochemist.
We were well aware that these people were going to be under the microscope of the press and anybody else that wanted to look at them. We knew that they would be required to represent us across the country, involved in the media, that they would be our representatives.
When my family found out that I had gotten into the program, I think that they were first astonished. But the main thing I remember is that my father was just ecstatic. And I think that the reason he was so happy was he finally understood what I was going to be doing for a living. When I was going to be a physicist, he wasn't quite sure what that meant, but astronaut he could really understand. So I think that he was thrilled that he got to be able to understand what his daughter was doing and say that his daughter was going to be an astronaut.
Once Sally and the other women astronaut candidates came to NASA in 1978, there were serious concerns on just how NASA and fellow astronauts would react to these women.
I think there were a lot of people that thought it was a mistake, probably as many astronauts, as much as current astronauts at that time, were probably as mixed on it as anybody. I'm sure, in fact, in thinking about it, I bet the majority of them didn't like it at all, because it probably kind of gave a little bit of that, well, you know, this job may not be so exclusive after all. I suspect a lot of them had some trouble with getting women into their astronaut corps.
So when NASA announced that they were going to take on some more people, those of us who were standing in line to fly already didn't think that was a really swift idea. You always feel like the shorter the line, the better your chances are. And then we were surprised when we found out how many they took, and it included the first women. And I don't know that anyone really ever talked about it. So we had a lot of women distributed throughout the NASA program, but it was still a real change to have women introduced into the flight program.
I think we were helped by the fact that there were 6 women coming in rather than just 1. And I think that we were helped by the efforts that NASA went to really make the other astronauts and all the engineers at the Johnson Space Center aware that this was going to happen, they better get used to it, and that we should be treated just like any of the other male astronauts.
I think most of the men that we worked with in the astronaut program sort of had a wait-and-see attitude. We had to prove that we were willing to work hard, that we were serious people, that we didn't expect them to carry our equipment for us, that we were willing to do the work that was here, and that this was something that we were really excited about. And once they found that out, and once they found that we weren't silly or frivolous, I think we were very well accepted.
We simply made others aware of the fact that oh, by the way, in this group, not all the astronauts are men, so if you haven't made some allowance for the fact that we have some women, you need to. And gradually, we noticed that people started accepting the fact that women were part of the group and that they were to be treated the way you would treat any other astronaut, not as novelties, not as pets, not as publicity stunts, but that they were for real and that they were going to do the same job everybody else did and had to be given both the same privileges and the same responsibilities.
For at least 4 years, all of these new astronauts followed a diverse regimen of rigorous physical, technical, and classroom training, as well as learning all about the shuttle and space program in general. Early in her training, Sally was given the assignment of developing and training with the remote manipulator arm, designed for retrieving satellites and other objects on orbit.
The system hadn't been entirely designed, and it hadn't been entirely tested, and it hadn't been simulated. So I got in not on the ground level, but maybe the first floor of that development program. And that was really interesting to me. I got to work with the engineers during the design process. I got to be one of the astronauts that did the early simulations of the robot arm. And I think that as a result of being in on the development of the system, I had a better understanding, and a lot of the other astronauts who also worked on it had a better understanding of how it was going to perform.
As the months of hard training passed, there was an ever-increasing awareness that the performance of all of these highly qualified women astronauts was being watched more and more closely, and that one of them would eventually be chosen to be the first American woman in space.
Competition in the astronaut corps is an interesting thing. It's not a real clear competition. You're not standing on a track and you can tell who the other 3 or 4 or 5 guys in the lanes next to you are. You can't at any given point necessarily look across the front of the pack and tell if you're in first or second or third place, because everybody's working a variety of different assignments and different niches, and it's sort of a diffuse competitive process.
The issue in the first 6 women of who was going to fly first wasn't something we all talked about at all. I think we all realized that we were competing in a loose sense, you know, for that. But I think we realized that it really wasn't something that we had a lot of control over.
So I'm sure on one level all 6 of us were aware somebody was going to have to be first. We were thrown into the same stew pot all together all at once, and certainly were united on an absolutely unambiguous level by the knowledge that we all wanted this to succeed. And much more important than who goes first to all of us was the issue of this needs to succeed. We all know we can do this. The first step, the first mission will be everybody's important touchstone, and that's got to go right.
My feeling is that I want to get up as soon as I can. So that means that I'd like to be the first woman up, but I don't have any great desire to be the first woman. I was certainly aware that it was very important for a woman to go up in the space shuttle, that the idea of the first woman astronaut was a very important idea. I'm a great believer in role models. I think that it's very important that there be role models for young girls and young boys growing up in whatever field, so that they appreciate that, you know, when they grow up, they can do this, they can do that, they can be a journalist, they can be an astronaut. And until there was a woman astronaut who actually went into orbit, that role model was not available to young girls. So I was very aware of those implications.
I mean, we're all pretty self-competitive people as well as generally aggressive and competitive people. So I'm sure on one level all 6 of us were aware somebody was going to have to be first. And notwithstanding the first woman syndrome, which can be an annoyance in some fair degree, that was a victory you could strive for. You could hope to have rated high enough to earn that first pick.
The first 6 shakedown flights of the shuttle successfully proved its reusability and usefulness as a satellite launcher. The goal of the 7th flight was to test the ability of the remote manipulator system.
I knew Judy Resnick really well. She and I had worked together very closely for, I guess a year and a half or maybe 2 years on the remote manipulator system. There was a period of time when she and I were the 2 main astronauts that were working on that system. I worked on it first and then basically handed it over to her, and there was a period of time when she and I overlapped and worked very, very closely together on it.
When they first were considering sending a woman up or appointing a woman into a crew for a shuttle, Judy called me the day before and she says, Daddy, they're going to choose who's going to be the first, and it's going to be me or Sally. I says, well, you'll make it. She says, well, we don't know. Nobody knows how they're going to choose, whether it's a toss of a coin or what.
On that particular flight, the 7th flight of the Space Shuttle, we were looking for an individual that had demonstrated good capability with a rope manipulator arm, and that the operator had to have good proficiency with the arm. And as it turned out, Sally had trained and worked with the arm during its development, and turned out to be probably one of the better operators we had for the arm. And so, looking at that mission and what we had to do on that flight, that was a natural match of what was required and the skills she had.
We knew that the first woman astronaut selected would be sort of the Neil Armstrong, or first lunar landing pilot. We were well recognized that was part of the job that we were all faced with.
The day that I was told that I had been selected for the crew, Chris Kraft called me into his office, basically to try to give me some warning of what I was getting into. And I think that that's really the right way to describe it. He wanted to talk to me about the implications of my flight, to make sure that I was comfortable with it, that I was comfortable with what was going to happen to me, essentially.
Dr. Ride, the obvious question, how does it feel to realize that because primarily of the luck of your birth, along with some good work and so on, you are going to become a footnote in history and a trivia question subject forever, among other things? How do you relate to all of that?
Gosh, that's quite an honor. Well, of course, I was very honored that NASA chose me to be the first woman. I guess that I was maybe more excited about getting a chance to fly early than I was about getting to be the first woman. I think that it's a real experience, and the experience of a lifetime to be able to fly in space and fly aboard the Space Shuttle. And I have to admit that I'm more excited about that opportunity than I am about being the, as you say, a footnote in history.
At about the same time Sally Ride was told she was to be the first American woman in space, Russia upstaged America again when in August 1982, female cosmonaut Svetlana Savitskaya was launched into space with the crew of Soyuz T-7.
The Russians had sent a woman into orbit in 1963. So they had actually sent a woman into space a very long time before we did. When I was first named to the flight in 1982 to fly in 1983, I hadn't really thought very much about the fact that the Russians had put a woman up. There was a lot of interest in the first American woman going up, but it wasn't really seen as competition.
For at least a year prior to a shuttle launch, every aspect of the entire mission had been experienced in simulators hundreds of times before. Sally not only had the responsibility for her role in the mission, but also having to deal with all of the publicity surrounding her milestone flight.
The training for my first mission was very intense. The crew was selected almost exactly a year before the flight, and we spent the next 12 months, seemed like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week together, practicing various aspects of the mission. We spent a lot of time in the simulators. The months before the flight, probably 8 hours a day in the simulators, practicing launches, re-entry, landing, and what we were going to do on orbit. The other mission specialists and I spent a lot of time trying to understand the experiments we were going to be carrying, working with the people that built the satellites, working with the people that had built the experiments so that we understood what they intended for the experiments, and so that we would be able to fix anything that went wrong and basically carry out their plan as they would have if they'd been able to be up there themselves.
When Sally flew the first time, I mean, it really, for one thing, that flight had a tremendous amount of focus on it because of the fact she was on it, but more than the very first flight of the shuttle. When she flew, boy, the tension, you know, really focused in. For one thing, she handled it well. She responded to the pressure and all well.
Dr. Wright, during your training exercises as a member of this group, when there was a problem, when there was a glitch or whatever, how did you respond? How do you take it as a human being? Do you weep? Do you what do you do?
Why doesn't anybody ask Rick those questions?
Once launch day came for Sally, the event still evoked the excitement of anticipation and the nervousness of the unknown.
I think an astronaut's first flight is special. It's something you haven't experienced launch before, you haven't experienced weightlessness before, and you haven't experienced the view of the Earth before. And when you put all those three things together in a one-week experience, it's an experience that you will never have again in your life. Every astronaut will tell you that launch is just spectacular, exciting, petrifying, terrifying, all those things, and it is. To be honest, although there are lots of dials and screens to be looking at, there is not a whole lot you can do in the several seconds before launch, and even the several seconds after launch. I think when the main engines light, you know that everything's starting. You know that you're about to go someplace, or you hope you are. But when the solid rockets light, it's just a completely different feeling. All of a sudden, you're on your way. There's a huge feeling of power and an enormous feeling of just absolute helplessness during the first several seconds after liftoff. Fortunately, that fades and kind of the training starts to take over. But that really didn't happen for me for 10, 15, 20 seconds after the launch. I was really overwhelmed for the first several seconds of the flight.
And seeing this immense cloud of flame and smoke and steam, and I think we sort of protected ourselves from the thought that our daughter was sitting and going up over 7 million pounds of thrust. And what I was thinking was, I am really cool and she's having a wonderful time.
I dream of reaching the rings of Saturn, feel like climbing the Milky Way. I trip the light over Earth's horizon, watching the clouds and the oceans play. High over planet Earth, right before my eyes, I can fly, and like a comet on an endless journey,
Weightlessness is just a fantastic experience. I remember on my first flight, we were all weightless, 8 or 9 minutes after launch, and I was on a flight with 4 other very professional, 30 to 40-year-old men, and we instantly became like 5-year-old kids. We were just having a great time. Doing somersaults, setting our pen and watching it float in the middle of the room. It's really an experience to be enjoyed, and I think that that one of the most enjoyable parts of actually each of my flights was late in the flight when most of the work was done. We had launched our satellites, or we had conducted our experiments, or the spacewalk was over, and we could relax just a little bit, for a couple of hours. Just being able to play around in weightlessness really made the flight special. The weather was just beautiful during the landing. We actually were supposed to land in Florida at the Kennedy Space Center, but the weather was awful there, so we got diverted into California and landed at Edwards Air Force Base. And Bob Crippen took over just after the space shuttle went subsonic, slowed down below Mach 1, and it was an absolutely beautiful landing. I remember that I didn't even know when the wheels had touched down. He landed it so smoothly.
Even though she was not a publicity seeker, Sally's performance was scrutinized closely by everyone questioning the role of women in space. After her flight, the media frenzy made her a universal symbol for women's accomplishments and achievements.
Judy says she wasn't especially hurt that she didn't go first because, and Sally Ride said the same thing herself, that she wasn't really happy to be the first woman because she knew she would have to do a lot of PR work. And she didn't want to do a lot of PR work, and NASA had her scheduled for a whole year of speeches. And after 6 months, Sally said, "No more. If you're going to make me go no more speeches, I resign." So they didn't make her do any more PR work.
I figured I could do a superb job taking the first flight, and on most levels would have been happy to do that. And the day Sally landed, I realized the best thing that had ever happened to me was not being first. And I've been only too happy to let her have all the rest of that stuff from that point forward. But yeah, I would have rather crossed that finish line first on a technical level.
When some of the later women flew, that took some of the pressure off of her, I think, because then there were other women that could do some of the public affairs role type things that they needed to do.
On October 5th, 1984, Sally flew again on the STS-41G with a record-breaking 7-person crew that included Dr. Kathy Sullivan, the third American woman in space, and the first woman to perform a spacewalk.
We've gone for main engine start. We have main engine start.
This flight involved the deployment of a satellite and several scientific experiments. Sally was again the mission specialist in charge of the remote manipulator system.
As I watch the earth below me from the corner of my eye, listen just outside my window, the phantoms of the night. For a moment I wonder, was it real or was it me? Or could it be the myth I heard before? If you have ever seen, I might have
Okay, Rebecca Chase, ABC.
This is for Commander Crippen and Sally Ride. Could you compare this mission with the other missions that you've been on, comparing the problems and the crowded conditions and the heat, as well as the accomplishments of what you think you're doing up there?
Well, the last mission that I was on with Crip was a great mission, and we really didn't have many problems, and we had a great time the whole time we were up there. This mission, I guess any space flight is a great space flight, and we're having an awful lot of fun. We've had a few more problems, but so far we've been pretty successful in all the things that we've been trying to do. We got the Herb spacecraft deployed on Flight Day 1, although that was a little bit of a struggle, but just made us all the more happy when we got it out there. And I think that the crowded conditions, it's more crowded with 7 people than it was with 5, but everybody's been pretty good about trying to stay out of everybody else's way, and it's really working pretty well. And as far as the heat goes, we're all from Houston, so it's nothing that we're not used to.
It was the pioneering spirit of Sally that led to other women achieving their dreams in the space program and elsewhere.
I do consider myself to be a role model. I think I'd be naive if I said that I weren't. All I need to do is go and give a talk at an elementary school or a high school, or really a women's group meeting just about any place in the country, and it's very clear that a lot of girls look up to me. A lot of girls look up to all the women astronauts in the program.
I had read and heard about these people when I was younger. As a lieutenant in the Air Force, I'd seen them on TV. I had seen Judy Resnick and Sally Ride on television. They had inspired me. I'd met Sally Ride at an appearance briefly. I was one of the thousands of people that went up and shook her hand at one of her events. Just meeting them alone was enough of a motivation to me. Hey, they've done this, they've been there, they've obviously survived, they're happy, they're enjoying their jobs, and that was enough for me.
I do miss spaceflight. I think every time a shuttle launches, there's a part of me that wishes I was on it. But on the other hand, if I didn't go back to a university and to physics research, it was going to be too late to go back. So I had to make a decision whether I wanted to stay with NASA, what would essentially be probably the rest of my career, or go back to what I had intended to do with my life all along. And I decided that physics was important enough to me, and being at a university was important enough that I wanted to leave the program and take that option.
The high visibility and successes of Sally and the other women astronauts no doubt contributed greatly to America's efforts to integrate women throughout all fields of endeavor.
I think it was really important to integrate men and women into the astronaut program and into the space program as a whole. You know, in the 1960s, the space program was really dominated by men, not just the astronauts, but all the engineers associated with it. If you see some of the old clips of Mission Control, you will not see a woman in those pictures. If you see old clips of any meeting where a decision was made, there really are very few or no women in those pictures. And that just doesn't represent society. It doesn't represent America.
The original 6 women, as we call them, were indeed pioneers. The women had a particularly specific job to do, and that was be the best they could be, and be good astronauts, and make those things mesh so that what has happened because of their work. Today, people do not think too much about there's a woman on board the shuttle, or there's 2 women on board the shuttle. They think there's a crew up there, and that was our goal from the beginning, and I think we've achieved that goal.
I think they all turned out to be excellent performers and proved that we were right in selecting them, and they were right for doing the job.
I think it's very important. If the space program is going to represent America, it's got to represent all the people in America. And that means having men and women, minorities, all represented in the appropriate proportions in order to best represent the capabilities of the country.
I really do think in many ways NASA is a reflection of an improving picture across the nation, may even be a model to look at. In the late 50s, early 60s, NASA was a all-white male show. And it took time to get people that had the right kind of backgrounds. But today, I believe NASA has got as many women in important places as the rest of our society. They have yet to, Carolyn Huntoon has broken through at the Johnson Space Center. There will be others that come up. And at that top level, as soon as that's done, I could see even a woman running NASA.
But today, America is perhaps even unique in the world in terms of being able to double the potential of the brain power by including women, compared to a lot of the other countries in the world with whom it is clear we are competing economically. I think other countries are nowhere near as successful for whatever reasons, probably most of which are cultural, but for whatever reasons, they are not able to adapt and to integrate women into the workplace as effectively, I don't think, as we have in the United States.
As a direct result of the dedication, sacrifices, and successes of these first women astronauts, it is now possible for young school children of both sexes to dream of becoming astronauts and someday to be pioneers themselves in colonies on other planets or permanent space stations.
I think the message really is what now sounds a little bit trite, that you really can do whatever you want to do, that you really can be whatever you want to be, that the opportunities are there now for women in all fields and have been for a little while now. And that what it really takes is just the commitment and the focus and the preparation to pursue those opportunities. But there aren't many doors that are closed to women anymore. So you really can decide at an early age what you want to do and pursue that goal.